in person rather, but we are still recording and sharing vision of themselves online. So please be careful what you say. The evaporation procedure, for those of you who can't remember it because it's so long since we were last here, is we are not expecting any form of alarm or test this evening. So if the fire alarm does sound, it's likely to be a real event. Please leave the building by the nearest safest exit, which is likely to be the door at the back of the room. If we can't use that one, through the front door. Go to assembly point G in the car park outside and stay there until Mr. Brown says you can do it. Members, it's now my sad duty to formally advise the board of the death of former Councillor Gordon Sherwood. I'm sure many of you will either know of or remember Gordon. He was a long-standing borough councillor and had been mayor of the borough. Gordon was one of those very much larger-than-life characters who I think just about everybody across the chamber had a very high regard for, and it's a great shame that he's no longer with us. Members, as a sign of respect, if you would please stand for 2 minutes silence. Thanks very much. The next item of business is members who are away on council business or for other reasons. I've received an apology from Councillor Jarvis, who is unavoidably detained with his grandson in dental hospital, and Councillor Lees, who is being substituted for by Councillor Mrs. Humphries. Are there any other apologies?
Also, Councillor Deakin, Chair, who's had to attend A&E, he's had an accident.
I'm sorry to hear that. Members, are you happy with the apologies?
Move that be agreed, Chair.
Thank you. And perhaps we could send our best wishes to Councillor Deakin for a speedy recovery. Councillor Mrs. Humphries, welcome back to me. Agenda item number 3 is disposable pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. Does anyone have anything to disclose? Councillor Haker?
I just thought to note that I am a member of Parliament, even though I don't agree with everything that's discovered later.
Thank you. In that case, members, we move on to the planning applications, the first of which is number 394 for Bolters Lane, Wood End and Aberstone. Members, we don't have many speakers this evening. I think the first one is on the final application. So we will move through fairly quickly, I think. Mr. Brown.
Chair, if we've got our speaker waiting for us online, should we not bring that agenda item forward?
I'm happy with that, members, if you are.
Yeah, no.
I can see our speaker is nodding, so he's clearly So Mr. Segu, welcome to the meeting. The way we normally do this is Mr. Brown will introduce the report and then Mr. Tobin will talk you through the process for public speaking. So
Thank you.
stand by while Mr. Brown introduces his report. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me get to the slides. It's the last one. It will take a little while, I'm afraid.
Oh, feel free to criticise Councillor Hayfield.
Happy to be of help, Chair.
Right, this is the one at King's Orchard Church Lane. The site there, Mr. Chairman's outlined in red. It's in the centre of the village. Coleshill Road coming down here. And you can see the church lane here coming off that road with the development on the other side of the road, some at the top end, and also the frontages to Coleshill Road. The green is down here. Members want to orientate themselves further. This, in fact, is the approval for the bungalow on site, which is referred to in the committee report. The site that you saw edged in red comes out here. The existing house here comes out here and includes this land here in this sort of L shape. This is the extent of the bungalow, which is extant permission on the site. There's a couple of car parking spaces here, and again the elevation of that front elevation of that. This is 12 Church Lane here, and the gable here is down here. That's the application for the smaller of the two houses on the site, bungalow. That's the application for the second, the house. And in terms of layout, Church Lane is obviously here. We've got the bungalow down here with its two car parking spaces and garden, and the second house here with its garden. This is the existing house, which would be retained with its garden. And then a street scene shows so that you can see levels. And we have been discussing with the applicant the possibility of lowering the bungalow even further, such that it's more in line with the existing bungalow down here, so to get a stepped appearance all the way down. If members, Mr. Chairman, are comfortable with the principle and the detail, we can include that as a condition. Just to say, Mr. Chairman, that since the application has been published on the agenda, we've received two further objections from local residents who repeat much of the information and representations that they made earlier on, and that's covered in the committee report on page 571. I've got nothing further to add, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the meeting. Mr. Tobin.
Thank you, Chair.
Good evening. In a moment, we'll be giving you 3 minutes in which to address the planning board.
Okay.
What I shall do is tell you when you have when your time starts, and when you have 1 minute remaining.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Your time starts now.
Okay. Thank you, Chair and members, for allowing me to make representations on behalf of the applicant. I am Ranjit Sagu, the representative agent for LTC. I am a town planner and urban designer. I just wanted to note that the case officer has been working with the applicant in a positive way, which was good for planning and development. There have been several iterations to the design. The case officer has helped shape the development that is before you today. This has been a reduction in the quantum of units that once included a row of 5 terrace cottages. The scheme has been reduced significantly, and it does look very much more contextual and fits into the character of the lane. This revised proposal includes retaining existing property to the west. That's to the left as you look towards the site. And then there's a 2-storey at the centre of the site with a bungalow to the east. And as noted in the planning history, the planning permission had been granted for bungalow or substantial bungalow on a similar location as where it is proposed now. The proposal is regarded as good design and makes a positive contribution, and this includes relating to the space between buildings, adequate parking, 2 parking spaces per dwelling, separation distances from existing properties. The 2-storey blends well with the interwar properties to the west and has a similar roof profile. There's the gradual change in the building line, which is a stepped approach. The adequate garden spaces, and as mentioned, sufficient separation distances between the existing and the proposed dwellings. And it maintains the prevailing character and quality of the surrounding street. And then also in relation to the bungalow, it is regarded that there would be no adverse overlooking to adjoining properties with the combination of the window location aspect.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Thanks. Single story bungalow and a 1.8 metre fence. There are overall betterment. It delivers betterment in the form of a pedestrian strip adjacent to the site, which is 1.2 metres, a delivery zone and a turning area. And therefore it is considered that the proposal complies with the NPPF and the development plan. Thank you, Chair and members, and hopefully that the application will be granted planning permission.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that confusion. I just want to be able to see your face while you're talking to us. Any questions for our speaker? I just have one, please. Mr. Brown indicated to us in his opening remarks that there was a possibility of reducing the height of the bungalow by setting it further into the ground, if you will. Is that something that you'll have to incorporate into your proposal?
I believe that we would. It'd be good to know from the elevations exactly how much. Would it be in line with the adjoining bungalow in terms of its roof profile and height? Is that what we're thinking?
I will find out, Mr. Brown.
Let me go there, Mr. Chairman. That's the elevations that we're talking about at the moment.
Oh yeah.
Talking about. So yes, it could be reduced down to the floor level here, or in fact just slightly lower. As long as there's a reduction, I think we would be comfortable with that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah. I believe that there is possibility of doing a reduction there. It obviously depends on the amount in terms of how much you're looking to reduce, but I believe, would you say something in the region of about within a half a metre?
Mr. Brown?
I think, Mr. Chairman, if members are comfortable with what is being said, perhaps this could be left in your hands and my hands with the applicant to sort out after the meeting.
Yep. Agreed.
Very aware of anything being left in my hands, but we'll certainly leave that as an open item for Mr. Seguri to talk to the planning officer about. Okay. Any other comments or questions, members? In which case, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Seguri.
Thank you, Chair and members.
Members, any comments or proposals? Councillor Hayfield?
I think the applicants have gone a long way to try and deal with some of the residents' initial concerns. I'm content to go along with the officer's recommendation and propose that we grant planning permission. So,
on the basis of the amendment.
With the added addition that you've talked about.
Thank you, Councillor Hayfield. Is there a seconder?
I'll do second, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Foat. If there are no other proposals, can I see those in favour of granting consent? Thank you. And any against? That's carried. Planning permission is granted. Thank you all very much. We now move on to the next application, number 600. The first application, number 294 for land at 6 Bolters Lane, Wood End. Members, I'm sure you will recall that this is the second time it's here, and it's here because there is an applicant. The applicant rather is an employee of the council. Mr. Brown, anything to add to the report?
No, I'll just show you a screen, Mr. Chairman, of the actual amended garage. The original submission is in the papers, brick-built garage. When I get there, that's it. It's smaller. This measures 6 by 6. The approval was 7 by 7. The original submission was 4 metres, 4.6 metres high. This is 4. So that's the amendment, Mr. Chairman. And the objector has withdrawn the objection.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you very much. I want to see all those in favour. Thank you. Any against? That's carried and planning consent is granted. We now move on to application number 679, land opposite Dells Field Stables, Walters Lane, Wood End. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just show you the site here first. It's the area outlined in red on screen. The area outlined blue here has consent for 14 already, and that is practically built out. There is also development here along the frontage and along here. The application, Mr. Chairman, is for 14 dwellings. Since publication of the agenda, the applicant has asked us to amend the description of the application to up to 9 dwellings rather than the 14. As a result of that, there's a reconsultation exercise being undertaken, and therefore, Mr. Chairman, I'll change the recommendation to one of deferral until we know the outcome of that reconsultation, and then report back to the planning board.
So, members, highly unusual for somebody other than the council to go for anything like before. So take the opportunity to have as much enjoyment out of that as you can. Anyone like to speak, or Councillor Heath?
We don't have to give reasons. Is Mr. Brown prepared to give reasons that are acceptable?
Oh, I think he just did.
In which case, I'll move his recommendation. Chair.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Can I see all those in favour of deferral? Any against? Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. You have your own way.
It'll come back to planning board, Mr. Chairman.
It'll come back to all of you. The next application, number 250 for land to 123 to the rear of Bowing Road, Ansley, has been withdrawn. So we move on to application number 490 for the flats at Alexander Court, Princess Road, Alliston. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The red line plan there shows where they are, just south of the A5. The QE score playing fields are here, the A5 being here. It's quite a large selection of blocks, as you can see. The existing appearance is as in the photograph, brick with a flat roof and some coloured cladding. The intention is to upgrade it with a pitch roof and colour cladding. That, in fact, Mr. Chairman, is the colours that were originally submitted with the application. Since then, I've been engaged with local members in trying to get a different colour cladding, and we have reached an agreement on an amendment whereby, in fact, the colours here would start off with a very dark sand colour, almost brown, and go lighter towards the top. The fascia would still be brown. There'd still be the pitch roof, but the stairwells would have a darker colour. And the local member that I've been speaking to, Mr. Chairman, is comfortable with that. And therefore, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that if that is the case, and members are happy with the principle of this, that again, planning permission be granted, subject to in consultation with yourself and the local member.
Members, if I might add, I was engaged with the early negotiations and really didn't like the early proposals. And I'm not that this should sway you one way or the other, but I'm more content with where we are now. But I wouldn't say it's money in the pack. Any comments, anybody? Are you content with the new colours?
As the other member for that area, I'm much happier with those colours than the original ones that were stated. I do wonder what residents think, so I've been able to engage with them to find out whether that is necessary. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we did that with the other ones that we have done around the borough, but the ones that were done on Priory Road have been very successful. I would support this.
I don't remember Priory Road with yellow.
It wasn't, but everybody that's commented on that, the residents in the town, have said that they think a vast improvement. So I would go along with what the other member for this area must have said. I haven't actually been able to talk to him about it.
We did consult you, didn't we?
We did.
So, members, you're proposing that?
Yes, I will support that.
And the second? Thanks very much. Members, could I just add to that I think, well, whilst we can't make this part of the consent, I do think it would be good form, good order, that we actually ask the housing department to be sure that they have consulted the residents, because they're the people who live there. Are you all happy that we add that as an informative to the?
Yeah.
Thank you. So it's been proposed, seconded, and an informative agreed. Can I see those in favour? And any against? Thank you very much. That's granted. We now move on to application number 254 for land adjacent to Moor Road, Hartsell. Mr. Brown.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application for a tree covered by an order. You can see it's in a residential estate, as you can see here. Moor Road, in fact, this road that comes down through here. The footpath that's being referred to is Moorwood Lane, which then comes down and continues down to the Coleshill Road. The tree there is there, right on the footpath, between two houses, and there are also houses behind. Photographs of the tree taken not in this particular summer, but you can see that that's the tree taken. Photographs of the tree that the tree officer has provided. I've got nothing further to add to the report, Mr. Chairman. The tree officer is a qualified arborist, as you know. He has visited this tree on several occasions and is recommending that that tree be felled for the reasons given in the report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. From memory, there were a number of concerns from local residents, but I think we've gone some way towards assuaging those concerns between the receipt of the application and now.
There has been some conversations. I know some of the objectors have spoken to Mr. Watkins, the tree officer, and they feel more comfortable with the fuller explanation that Mr. Watkins gave to them over the phone.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's right. There have been a lot of concerns in Hartsfield about this. I'd like to thank the tree officer because he's been very patient and explained to everyone why the tree has to come down. So with some reluctance, it's been accepted. I would like to say, though, that the recommendation is a little wide, to replace it with a tree somewhere at some time. And I really would like a replacement suitable tree, and hopefully an oak, to replace this one as close as possible to that. Obviously, it can't go in the same place, but somewhere in that region. So if I could just say that the replacement tree must be at least in Hartshill and in consultation with local.
Is that your dog?
I'm not here. Councillor Derby.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear what Councillor has just said, because that there is very much what my thoughts were on this. It is obviously necessary to remove this tree because of the condition it is, but it actually says in the report that it does have good amenity value. And I would like to go a little bit further than Councillor Bell in saying that we should be investigating whether another tree that isn't going to be as big as that could be put in that position as well. Taking out one tree and replacing it with one somewhere else doesn't completely tick all the boxes. I prefer it if actually put a tree somewhere else that is going to be big, like the oak there, and put a more appropriate one in that location. When that tree started growing, there weren't houses all the way around it. And it does add to that area. If we just accept that when they become inconvenient or when they get old, we weed them out, we can do that to the councillors as well. And it's not necessarily appropriate. I'd also like to see the recommendation narrowed down. And I've said this before about other trees, and I will say it about the next application as well, that when we put in that a tree has to be replaced with something that is appropriate, I think we need to put a timescale on it, because if we just say we must consider doing it at some point, could come back in 10 years and we're still considering it. I would like it to be narrowed down that it should be replaced within the next planting cycle, which is usually a year.
Thank you. Members, I've just been advised that there is a bit of confusion, perhaps, that maybe we have a speaker for this item. Mr. Tobin, what could you tell us?
Yeah. I'm just checking, Chair, I'm just checking that that is the case, because I think otherwise initially confusing, is it this one or the next item?
It's this one.
Yes, it is.
It's
Chair,
just
it is this one.
It's this one.
So,
Sister, I suppose.
Okay, so members, this is, I'm sure you'll all agree, unusual, but if you don't mind, I'd now like to adjourn the discussion, and we'll go to our speaker, hear what the speaker has to say, and then we'll come back to the rest of the debate. Are you all happy?
I think that's essential.
Yeah. So apologies, I'm going to have to call you Mr. Speaker because I don't have your name. But Mr. Speaker, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name's Simon Pearson, and hopefully, as you can perhaps see from on this lovely sunny afternoon, you can see behind me the actual tree in action. I live next door to the house. I'm the person who has to deal with all the leaves and all the problems that the tree brings. But still, for all that reason, I think there's a point that we need to be thinking about. First of all, I'd like to say I think it's most unfortunate that the photographs that were not dated and can be deemed very misleading. Although they were published in July, they were taken significantly earlier in the year. And I don't know, as the light begins to fade, you can see the tree clearly behind me. And although there is some evidence of it being an aging tree, I'm not convinced it would be called an elderly or a dying tree. I've spoken to two different retired tree surgeons, and both of them are of the opinion, although it's a mature tree, they have questioned the longevity of the tree. And they have both said to me that the only way to actually ascertain the safety of the tree would be through doing a physical inspection. I've been led to believe that this has not been taken place. And although I'm not an expert on trees, I've been told it's all around the internal trunk, which will give the evidence of what future the tree actually has. I've also been informed that the physical inspection has not taken place due to the cost for this to take place. But the obvious point to make is that it'd be far cheaper to have an inspection than to go to the expense of actually chopping the tree down. There are obviously issues around what it looks like for Hartshill and the nature and the wildlife that lives there. And clearly that has to be thought about. But of course, the most important thing is this tree a danger to the inhabitants and the people who live around it? Clearly, if it is a danger, then it needs to be chopped down. But I do believe felling should be the final option and not the first one. I have been told that the tree is probably an addition of 150 years old. And I think it would be shameful to chop it down without having complete confidence that that is the only option. I do not need to tell any of the councillors that this tree has been here significantly longer than the houses. And I think it's unfortunate that because houses have been built around a tree, then the tree has to go rather than other options. Finally, I would like to echo the words that Councillor Bell said, that if the tree has to be felled, then a suitable replacement should take place. But unlike the recommendation, I do believe that it should be placed on the same site rather than somewhere else. Thank you very much for giving me the time to talk.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Hayfield?
Has there been any suggestion that there have been dead branches falling or anything in the last year or so?
Not anecdotally to myself, no.
Thank you. There are no more questions, so thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Members, I'm in a bit of a quandary here now because we have advice both ways. My instinct, in all honesty with you, is that we should defer this, have a site visit, or at least have the clarity of the questions that the questioner has raised. Because I can see in the report it says that there have been inspections, but frankly, I feel rather more comfortable with a detailed report answering those points. Councillor Hayfield.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I agree entirely with what you've just said. I was going to vote against this. I think felling it is entirely the wrong thing to do at the moment. And if there's an opportunity to defer it for a more detailed look, I mean, certainly the tree I see there looks far more alive than the pictures in the report, which are quite misleading, I think, in terms of what is suggested. And all oaks go through a period when they mature and they start to get a bit of dieback, they become staggers. And they're good for another 50, 60 years or more. Half the oak trees you see as you drive around North Warwickshire have started to get a bit of dieback because they've reached that maturity and started to do that. I see no reason at the moment why this tree needs to come down, and I would welcome an opportunity for somebody else to go and have a look at it and see whether they're of similar mind or not.
Thank you. Councillor Dervick, then Councillor Hunt.
I would say if that is a recommendation, I would support that and second it.
Thank you. Councillor Humphries.
The speaker said that he didn't believe there had been a site visit. Do we know if there's been a site visit? I'd be interested in that by the arborologist. And the other thing, this council is strapped for cash at the moment, and we've employed a professional arborologist who's now moving on to another local authority. Should we make the saving? If we're not going to listen to what the arborologists are saying, should we either trust the people that we put into these jobs or we don't have it. So I don't want to see a tree necessarily knocked down, but I actually think we should actually listen to what the arborologists are. But I'd be very interested to see if he did a site visit. And I know, having dealt with that arborologist over the last few years, he very rarely asks for trees to be knocked down. He does his best to keep them up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I understand exactly what you're saying, Councillor Humphries. I think I'd just like some clarity to be certain. Mr. Brown, anything to say before we have a vote? So we've had a proposal to defer. Can I see those in favour? And any against? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Members, we now move on to another tree four trees in Council, application number 355, land to the rear of 32 to 52, Chestnut Grove. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, site plan, under the coal bridge, bottom of the hill in Council is here, and the river coal comes around here off the pub and Station Road industrial estate is further to the north. The flats you can see here at St Paul's House, the Chestnut Grove here, and the groups of trees along the riverbank in that location there. I've got nothing further to add to the report, Mr. Chairman. Again, it's been the subject of investigation and inspection by the council's arborist, and the reasons for his recommendation that the trees be held are given in the report.
Councillor Hayfield.
Chairman, I'm going to be a real tree hugger tonight. I'm really against this. I've known this area pretty well over the last 30 odd years. There's always been an issue with roots on the footpaths down there. It's never caused a problem to anyone. There's nothing actually wrong with the trees. Nobody suggesting that trees are diseased or falling or down anything. They're simply being considered inconvenient in terms of footpath maintenance. I'm looking at the officer's observations. The remit of the board is solely to decide whether to make a tree preservation order in respect to all of one of them. I think we should, and I believe that we do.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, we don't actually have trees which we own, which in fact are subject to orders. We are a responsible authority, planning authority, and that's the reason why we have no orders on our own trees. There's nothing to prevent you, I don't believe, from making an order on a local authority tree, but that would set a precedent in terms of where you're going, the weight you're going to give to the advice of your arborist, qualified expert arborist, who Councillor Humphries has referred to earlier on in the previous session.
So if you could help us, perhaps Mr. Brown or Mr. Tobin, because I'm now at a bit of a quandary again. From what you're saying, the trees don't have a TPO, but they are within a conservation area.
The trees are protected by conservation area status. They have not got an order, but in terms of planning terms, they are protected. The application gives you in fact, it is now outside the period in which the application can be determined, because the application has to be determined within 6 weeks. If in that period, the council has to determine whether it makes an order for the trees or not. And what we are saying is the trees are already protected as if by an order because of the status in the conservation area. And therefore, there is no need to add an order in this particular case.
And members, I'll own up. It wasn't the officers that, through any lack of attention to the application, it was I held up the issue because I wanted to go and see them and see what condition they were in. So the delay in 6 weeks is entirely down to me. Councillor Hayfield.
I'm just confused what Mr. Brown says, because when we're talking about the remit of the board is solely to decide whether to make a tree preservation order, is what he's written. So if it's inappropriate for us to do that, I'm not sure why it's there. Whatever it is, and I'd welcome the advice on it, I don't want to see them cut down. So what do I have to propose to make sure they don't get cut down?
Councillor Hancock.
I think the concern here is that actually it is all down to the fact that the footpath cannot be supposedly repaired. There's no other options in here of how they're going to repair the footpath. It literally just says we can't do it, so we're going to sever the roots. Well, there's got to be other options. We just discussed in the last application that this is the final option to cut down a tree. Yeah, this seems to be the first option here.
Councillor Derby.
I haven't actually visited this site recently, so my memory might be a little inaccurate on this, but it seems to me that my memory is right, that there would be room to actually move the path instead of repairing the bit that is damaged, actually extending the path the other way so that it avoids the roots. And may this be a better, environmentally more friendly and possibly even financially advantageous solution to this problem? Has it been looked at in those terms?
Members, I'm genuinely delighted that you said all of those things, because I was not keen on the idea of cutting down 4 healthy trees to simply put in a footpath.
Well, it's actually 9 trees that they're talking about, so it is a substantial alteration to the path there. If they are not diseased already and in dangerous condition, then I do question whether that is the best solution for us.
I think the trees are healthy and they will stay healthy until we cut their roots in place. I'm not an expert in this, but I would have thought the grasscrete or other form of footpath in the immediate vicinity ought to be a possibility. So, members, I think you have 2 options before you. You could defer the application. Right, you have 3 options. You could say you're happy with the trees to be cut down. I'm not hearing that loud and clear. You could defer the application and ask for a report on tree management and what the options are. That's not strictly within this board's remit, but I think it could be additional information to enable you to make a decision, or you could refuse consent.
Now, just to ask, you mentioned managing trees. Is there an alternative there in managing the park, i.e. the path in the park? Because that's one of the options that we're talking about.
I'm looking at the representative of the organisation that at least partially owns the park. Councillor Hayes.
Yeah, what was your third option?
Refuse the application.
Well, I think I'll be content to do that, and then the authorities will have to come back with some other alternatives.
Mr. Brown.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I have to point out legally it cannot be refused. The 6 weeks have lapsed, and therefore by default a tree preservation order can now not be put on those trees.
But I'm not aware there's an application here to put a tree application on. That's not what the report says, Mr. Brown. It's an application for works to the trees, not to put the preservation order on. Sure.
It's a notification application, Mr. Chairman. It's not a consent application. And a notification application, the applicant is giving notification to the board that is intended to fell the trees. The only option that you have is to put a tree preservation order on or not. And as I said, the trees are already protected, and therefore that's the reason, one of the reasons why an order is not being considered. That notification has to be determined within 6 weeks. If that lapses, then a tree preservation order cannot be placed on by default, and that's the regulation, that's under the tree regulations.
Just remind Mr. Brown, who is the applicant?
At the council.
So I'm sort of sitting here feeling as though I'm under Chief Justice in the Parks of Penzance trying to give myself consent for something that I no longer can have. Councillor Hayfield.
I hear what Mr. Brown says, that in theory, these things are protected already. Well, clearly not very well protected, otherwise we wouldn't be talking about cutting them all down. So if the only option is to go for a tree preservation order, then I propose that's what we do.
Okay. Members, to move on, because otherwise we'll be here until well past the time the chip shop will have closed. I'd like to move deferment of this because purely to get a report on the general condition of the park, to enable us to make a decision on it. I'm being given advice that we cannot now put a TPO on these trees, and clearly I'm lost as to exactly where we can do. I get the impression we'll sit around going in circles until we actually get a further report.
Can I ask a question? Can we actually stop this work being undertaken?
Yes, as a local planning authority, no, but as a borough council and as a landowner, yes.
Right, okay.
Councillor Parsons.
Thank you. It would seem to me that the suggestion has been made that perhaps the path could be moved, and that would seem to be the sensible suggestion in this case. But that would presumably require a site visit so that we can look to see whether, in fact, the path could be moved. That would seem to me to be the happiest way out of this, and I would suggest that we do.
I'm perfectly happy to agree with you, Councillor Parsons, but that's not within this board's remit. I think this particular part of the park might be owned by Coleshill Town Council, or at least they are the part owners of the park. So whichever part of the council it is, it's not us. Councillor Bell, then Councillor Willis.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the last statement to Mr. Brown. So I'll try and put in my words and see if it's right. So what you're saying is, as a planning board, we cannot stop the felling of these trees, but as the borough council, we can. And just judging from the views around the table, these members of the borough council are saying, please don't fell the trees. So how can we ensure that the felling of the trees does not happen? So what is the route for us to
I will give
so?
you an undertaking, Councillor Bell. I will call the Chief Executive from the rising of the board,
right,
and make it clear that several members of the Borough Council don't want the trees to be cut down, no matter what our legal ability is or is not.
Right.
I was just going to make the point that as representations, Coleshill Town Council is only very reluctantly accepting this. And I wonder whether this other alternative has been put forward to them.
And we know that even at least one member of the Town Council doesn't agree with it.
That's not relevant, he's on his own.
I'm waiting for all the comments about whether or not it should be felled. That's all draw a line. Members, if you will bear with me, and we'll move for a deferment and bring it back next time with some more information.
Correct.
So I'll propose that. Seconded. Those in favour? Any against? Thank you very much. Application number 254 for 72 Church Road, Hartsell. Mr. Brown?
I've got nothing further to add to the report, Mr. Chairman. The reason the application is reported is because a member actually lives at the property. But just to show you where it is, Mr. Chairman, the red line there on Church Road, Hartsell, and the elevations, proposed elevations, as you can see there, and again the side elevation.
And in the spirit of complete openness and transparency, Mr. Brown, can you advise members which member of the council it is?
It's Councillor Parker.
Thank you. Members, any comments, questions? Councillor Bell?
I'm happy to say.
Do I have a seconder?
Seconded.
Thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous, and consent is granted. I do think, members, it's a bit unfortunate. He couldn't come, and we could all send him outside and pretend that we're going to vote against it. As we normally do. Application number 50 for Fir Tree Paddock, Quarry Lane, Manchester. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This application was reported to you last time, and the site visit was moved. That took place last week. Just so that members can see, remind themselves, the existing mobile home van is here. The amenity building is here. The cesspit is here, and the second one is the one that's now proposed. Is the one that I'm showing you there. Following the site meeting, several members asked a series of questions, and as a consequence of that, I sent an email around to members at the end of last week, trying to answer some of the factual questions that were asked at the meeting. In terms of foul water, then the intention, as you can see here, is to connect to the existing cesspit from the second van, as you can see there. Water supply is taken from a borehole under EI under an Environment Agency licence, as is the case elsewhere on several of the other sites up and down this particular track. And electricity is taken from the mains supply. On site, members saw two additional buildings which are not shown on the plan, one here and one here. There is a retrospective application submitted about 10 days ago for retention of those two. That has not yet been validated, and therefore that's not a public document, but hopefully will be validated quite shortly. So that's just a factual update, Mr. Chairman. In terms of the actual proposal, then this is a lawful gypsy and traveller site, granted appeal. Members will be aware in the forthcoming local plan, which hopefully you adopted later on this month, that there is now a new requirement for gypsy and traveller pitches in the borough, an increased requirement. And this seems to me, Mr. Chairman, an appropriate location on a lawful gypsy and traveller site for another pitch. In other words, it would help meet that requirement without going onto greenfield land elsewhere or the green belt. I see no technical reasons for refusal. The Highway Authority has not objected. Members on their site visit will have seen the developments up and down that lane, plus the substantial quarry at the end. So one additional vehicle or two additional vehicles is not considered to be material in terms of the County Council, and there is no technical objection, as I've outlined on the updates that I gave to members on that email. Those are matters which are technical matters which will be dealt with under the building regs or under other legislation. In terms of character and appearance of the area, members saw the site and they saw its setting, they saw its context. And that's the reason why I'm saying that this particular additional van can be assimilated into the landscape, and therefore there would be no adverse impact on character and appearance of the area. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I would find it very difficult to come up with a reason for refusal if that's what members wanted or were looking at on this particular application.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Could you, just so that we're all clear, put a bit more flesh on the bones of what it was the inspector gave consent for compared to what he's being asked for in this application?
Well, consent was for the one caravan and the amenity block, plus all the utility arrangements that were there. So therefore, that's the yellow existing mobile home, which is here, the amenity block, and the arrangements, the sewage arrangements that you can see here. The building that was here and here were not permitted by the inspector. So we now have that retrospective application. And the application we have in front of us is for a second caravan, which would be located here. And in the report, Mr. Chairman, I know that the question was asked last time about the definitions of a caravan. I've included those in the report for you this time.
So put simply, Mr. Brown, we're very right in saying this is, if you will, an intensification of use to put more caravans onto a site that already has consent for one.
It has consent for one. This will add a second.
Thank you very much. And the Highways Authority have raised no objection. Have they given any reasons why that is the case?
Again, it's not a material increase in traffic using that lane, particularly as the marinas at the end, and there are several commercial uses which members saw on their site visit who gain access off Quarry Lane down that track.
And in the letter of no objection, did they explain to you what they had done to assess the level of use on the lane or not?
They will have site visited, Mr. Chairman, so therefore they would have seen what was there, and they know the marinas at the end because that was a consent which was granted some time ago, and therefore they will have assessed what traffic is likely to be generated by this one van against what is already generated along that particular access from the uses.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Members? Councillor Humphries?
I wonder, Chair, if I can ask Mr. Brown, the other two buildings that are not there, I know that we have to look at what we're looking at the moment, what's put in front of us, but there are two buildings there that I would assume are illegal. They've already been constructed. Are they able to, in the end, once they get permission, if they do get permission for those, they become 4 caravans on that site?
Mr. Chairman, that's speculation, and I'm not going to respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Chairman. I understand Mr. Brown's latest response. However, we're being asked to consider an additional caravan where there's 1 caravan on the site, but there are 3 caravans on the site. Whether or not the other 2 are authorised or not is immaterial. There are 3 caravans on that site, so we're being asked, should there be 1 more if there are 3? And I think it's very misleading, the diagram on the board, which shows only 1 caravan there. The fact that the other 2 aren't authorised doesn't mean they're not there, because we saw them. So, you know, this, for me, this application, we need far more information. And I'm not at all happy with highways just dismissing it. When you come out of that lane, you're right on the traffic lights over a very small canal bridge. And I would like an independent highways review of this, particularly as there's a lot of other developments along that lane that may or may not be authorised. And I think highways should take those into account. And I think before we can make a decision on this, we need the full picture. We can't do it in bits. I think if they're going to apply for consent for the 2 other caravans that are there, then it should all come forward together.
Mr. Brown?
Please, Mr. Chairman, the retrospective application is not the 2 caravans, it's not the 2 pitches, it is the 2 buildings. The buildings that we actually saw on site, they are not caravans.
Well, and they're buildings, but they're not on the diagram.
That is an entirely separate issue, Mr. Chairman. That's being dealt with through a retrospective planning application, and that will be dealt with on its merits, just as this application has to be dealt with on its merits.
I agree, Mr. Brown, but at the same time, members have a reasonable request to look at the entirety of the site and everything that's happening there. I just think, you know, it's not unreasonable to say, show me the full picture. Members, any other comments? I've had a proposal for deferment. I think, Councillor Bell, a deferment and additional information, perhaps including an independent traffic assessment. Councillor Parson?
It's just a question for Gerard. You mentioned that that we now fall short of our required numbers of gypsy placements. Can you tell us how far short we are to swear?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Assuming that the local plan is adopted, then the modified requirement will be 19 pitches from 2019 to 2033. Now, of those 19, 13 have already been granted at appeal or planning commission has been granted, so there is still a shortfall of 6 or 7.
Forgive me saying this, Mr. Brown, but source of the goose is source of the gander here. What is the present position, notwithstanding the fact that we're about to adopt a new plan?
I've got to put it that way, Mr. Chairman, because the development plan policy that stands at the moment, which is the core strategy, has been found to be out of date, which is why the planning commissions have been granted appeal at Kirby Glebe. That only required 9 pitches from 2011 through to 2028.
Okay, so I think what I understand is that under the existing plan, we have a requirement which appears to have been met, but which has been found to be statutorily out of date. So the best guide we have is the plan which we are, in theory, about to adopt, which indicates a shortfall of 6. So over the period between now and 2030.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Crick.
We actually had a look at Google Earth today for, funnily enough, Kirby Glebe, and we counted 65 pitches of the 7 that have been authorised. So I think that would really exceed what we are requesting.
Perhaps, But as we all know, there's a whole deal of enforcement activity going on at Kirby Dean, which is outside the
Yes.
yeah. This. And I do apologise, Councillor Clues. I was going to invite you to speak. Do you want to speak now or
Oh,
later?
no, that's okay.
I'm Councillor Phillips. No.
Yes,
I'm happy to second the recommendations. Yeah.
thank you. Members, any other comments? So we have a proposal for deferment with further information, perhaps including an independent traffic assessment and just
So with that deferment, is it possible to have the fully up-to-date information of how many pitches are at these 3 current sites, so we understand where we are compared to the target before we come to make a decision?
Yes, I think it would be reasonable for us to have a broad understanding of our gypsum traveller policy position, both in terms of the out-of-date plan, the new plan, and where we're going. I think, Mr. Tobin, if you could talk to our colleagues in for planning, so that we can have as a board an update on G&T policy and provision.
Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Any other council members? If Councillor Parker?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's possible to have any information with the release side, which is greatly extended. Yeah.
I'm happy to do that as part of an overall policy statement, but not as part of the consideration of this application.
Yeah, it'd just be useful to know what might be final outcome there.
That is all dependent on what the chap in the wig says.
Yeah.
Or chap or lady. I do think, members, it's important to maintain strictly the position that this is one application, Kirby Glebe is utterly separate. Okay, all those in favour of deferral? Any against? Thank you very much, that's deferred.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say thank you to the board for looking at this with fresh eyes, especially after the site visit. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, we move on to item number 6. Mr. Brown, your report on public sector infrastructure.
I've got nothing further to add, Mr. Chairman. Members already had an initial report on this particular procedure, which is now brought into effect, as you can see.
Members, I'll echo that. It's probably much better if I have nothing further to add to the comments last time. Does anybody have anything further to add?
With the recommendation.
All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's carried. Agenda item number 7 is the latest iteration of the National Planning Policy Framework. Mr. Brown.
And again, I've got nothing further to add, Mr. Chairman. I've outlined 5 or 6 changes in the report. And members have got access to the link to the new MPPF if they wish to look at it.
As I recall, Mr. Brown, this was first introduced, it was going to be so simple, so easy to adopt and to use in practice that all the planning laws in the country would go bankrupt. Have you noticed any going out of business?
That's probably not a question directed at me, Mr. Chairman.
Members?
Make it be noted.
All those in favour? Thank you very much. Agenda item number 8 is a report of the Chief Executive for support for South Staffordshire Council's approach to unmet housing needs. Mr. Brown.
I think the report speaks for itself, Mr. Chairman. It follows the approach that we took in looking for housing needs and requirements from the Greater Birmingham area. When we looked at the local plan, the examination inspector has accepted that. It's the same approach that South Staffs are adopting here, with an equivalent proportion of Birmingham's housing needs. So therefore, the recommendation is that we would support that similar approach.
I just have a couple of questions because I don't really understand. I thought the duty to cooperate was no longer in force. Is that not?
There is still an equivalent duty, Mr. Chairman. It may not be called that, but there's still an equivalent duty which an examination inspector would certainly be looking at. To make sure there was agreement and concord between local authorities.
And if I just go back to a previous meeting, the executive board, I understand that Nuneaton and Bedford Borough Council have unilaterally withdrawn from the duty to cooperate which we entered into with Birmingham and other authorities. And the message I was being given at that meeting was it sort of didn't really make any difference. So do these things have any relevance now or not?
They will have relevance in the examination, Mr. Chairman. That's where they carry weight, and that's one of the reasons why the inspectors accepted found that our particular plan is sound, because there was that agreement, as I said, on concord between the local authorities. If there is not that, when the Neatons plan comes up for examination, then they may have some difficulty.
And I'm sorry for my final question, Mr. Brown. I know it's not your report, but you're the nearest I have to the Chief Executive at the moment. They're looking, I think, at South Staffordshire making a provision for 4,000 additional dwellings. Is that based on the same assessment of need for Birmingham as the time we had our?
Exactly. It's done on a proportional basis, pro rata basis as well. That's the reason why it's subjective rather than subjective.
Thanks very much. Members? You're all obviously convinced.
The recommendation.
Second to slide. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you. I am sorry, Chambers, you were going to talk to us on the MPPA. Are you content?
Yes, I'm quite content.
The programme, sorry. Mr. Brown, the appeal update.
Nothing there, Mr. Chairman. 3 recent appeals that we received.
3-0, Mr. Brown. Any comments, members? Any whoops of delight?
Just a comment that it underlines the good work that our planning department is doing to make these recommendations to us, that we can discuss them properly and come up with a decision that is borne out by inspectors.
Were they all, on this occasion, Mr. Brown, were they all your recommendations, or did members play about them?
You just go back through, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
No, they're all recommended for refusal, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, definitely 3-0 then. Thank you, Mr. Brown, and thank you, Councillor. Verdicts. Can I see all those in favour of noting the report? Thank you very much, members. Thank you for your time and forbearance. Have a safe journey home.
Stop talking about